Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Magali Urquiza, soy directora de la unidad de Biotecnologia de GB Consulting. Hoy en esta oportunidad vamos a hablar sobre el sector de biotecnología con un invitado muy especial, John LaMattina, de Senior Partner de Biotech. John fue director global de Pfizer en el Departamento de Investigación y Desarrollo durante 30 años. Y hoy vamos a estar haciéndole unas preguntas acerca del sector de biotecnología, cuáles son los desafíos actuales y cuáles son las oportunidades o los horizontes dentro de la industria. Así que, well, John, how are you? Now I have already done the intro, so I'm very happy to see you again.
Same here.
Great. Well, John, first of all, as I was telling you before about biotech industry, well, it's been a couple of rough years for the industry. So considering the Argentinian market doesn't know much about the sector, from a broad standpoint, what can you tell us about the current landscape in biotech?
Well, I think we're in a very exciting time in biotech. I think science continues to explode, and all sorts of new opportunities seem to be arising. I think one of the most prolific examples of that is the recent GLP-1 drugs that have come out initially from Novo Nordisk and Lilly, but a whole host of other companies are trying to come up with their own version. The initial drugs, Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, are injectables. There'll probably be another couple of injectables coming out, but then also a number of many companies are looking for small molecule drugs that can be given. So instead of an injection that the initial compounds are being given by, you can instead take a pill. Now, the amazing thing about these drugs are that they were initially developed to help treat diabetes. They're now found to also reduce weight in obese people, significant amounts of weight. But there are also other potential uses in things like addiction, alcohol addiction, that are now being explored. The beauty of these drugs, I think, are that they're not just drugs to help people look better and get skinny, but obesity is related to all sorts of diseases, including heart disease. And these drugs have been proven to reduce heart attacks and strokes in people who are non-diabetic, but who just lose weight as a result of these drugs. So they're exceptional drugs, and it's typical of what I see in the industry today, in that various breakthroughs are being made that can be exploited in a variety of different ways. And so there's a number of approaches to treat cancer coming out. There's a whole new renaissance in drugs to treat neuroscience diseases like depression and schizophrenia and things like that. And then, of course, what we saw, the miracle of mRNA vaccines that really saved the world from a horrible pandemic. So I think it's an exciting time in the industry. I think it's going to continue to be exciting. And we'll see if I'm right as we go forward.
It's one of the most beautiful sectors, so yes. Talking about vaccines, we have recently witnessed an increase on bird flu cases. Can we say that we are approaching a pre-stage of pandemic, of a bird flu pandemic, or are we far away from that?
I think COVID-19 is like the flu. It's going to be with us forever, not to the same degree as it was obviously in 2020 and 2021. But I think people will be getting, like they get an annual flu shot, I think they'll be getting an annual COVID shot. And it's entirely likely, maybe by this fall, that companies like Moderna and Pfizer will have a combined shot. So you get your flu shot and your COVID shot at the same time. And I think that will make things easier. I still have known just in my little part of the world here in the United States in Connecticut, I know a half dozen people who've had COVID in the past month or two, particularly people who have traveled overseas and who come back. Obviously, they've picked it up in planes and things, but I'm not as worried about COVID now because if you detect it early enough, you can take some of the drugs like Paxlovid that will make the seriousness of the infection diminish. So I think we have a pretty good armamentarium. I think there'll be continued COVID evolution, and the different strains will come up. But it looks like that the vaccine companies are on top of that and keep coming up with new versions of the vaccine to cover the new variants that are emerging. So I think we'll be all right. The interesting thing people are now getting worried about here in the United States is bird flu. And we're still in early days of that. It's mostly been confined to animals. But there's now the worry that it might spread to people, but that's just something we'll have to watch and see.
Given the efficiency of mRNA technology in terms of how successful they were with COVID-19, do you think that conventional vaccines have or are going to be taken over by new mRNA technology?
Oh, I think we're just scratching this.
I'm sorry. I remember back in the days when Moderna was competing against, I don't know, vaccines such as AstraZeneca or even the Sputnik, who was tested here in Argentina. And in terms of efficiency, I don't know if they were able to actually be compared because they were far more successful.
Well, the beauty of the mRNA vaccines is that they can be produced rapidly. And unlike the older technology, which you'd have to grow the vaccine in eggs or whatever, these are now synthetic vaccines. And the real challenge of delivery of mRNA vaccines, and the hump that people had to get over, took about 10 years, was delivering into the cell so that the vaccine could begin to produce itself, produce enough of material to raise the antibody response. Now, I think people are looking at mRNA vaccines even for other diseases, because to a certain extent, it could be other ways to utilize this. So I think we're just, it's a long way to say, I think we're just at the cutting edge of this. I think the technology will continue to, like all technologies, will continue to improve. The mRNA vaccines are somewhat short-lived, and that after about 9 months, the effect seems to wane. Maybe, and I'm just speculating now, I don't have any insights into this, maybe there'll be others that will be a little longer acting or more permanent. But there's no doubt that they work. There's no doubt that they save the world. And I think it's a pretty bright future ahead for other types of diseases that hopefully we can use this technology for.
Yeah, yes, I agree with that. Another two topics that I wanted to touch on with you was the next diseases who are now becoming more demanded, especially in terms of patients, right, that need these drugs. And in this case, I'm going to quote one area which we have long discussed before, neuroscience. What do you think it's the pathway or the path that the industry is moving on neuroscience? Do you think there are specific niches or diseases in neuroscience that the industry is looking for or digging more in depth than others, or is it just all neuroscience?
It's a fascinating area to see this rebirth in neuroscience research. Now, in my Pfizer days, which is a long time ago, I left Pfizer about 15 years ago, but at the time, we were de-emphasizing research in the neurosciences, particularly with the exception of Alzheimer's, particularly, but de-emphasizing depression, schizophrenia, and things like that, anxiety. And that was because the drugs that were out there were pretty good, and were going generic. So drugs like Zoloft or Geodon for schizophrenia and others were pretty good. And it wasn't obvious that there were other new approaches that could supersede those. Once a drug gets generic, it's pretty cheap. And then if you try and come up with a new drug for depression or schizophrenia, that drug has to be a whole lot better than a generic drug. Otherwise, nobody will be able to pay the premium price that you would hope to get with a new therapeutic. If you came out with a new drug for depression that was just as good as Zoloft, well, nobody would care because Zoloft was a pretty good drug, and Prozac as another from Lilly, and so nobody would buy it, and so you wouldn't be able to sell it. But a couple of things have happened in the past decade. One is that it's been recognized that the current drugs to treat depression are okay, but there are a lot of people who are resistant to current therapies for treating depression. The same thing is true with psychosis and schizophrenia. And so and a lot of times somebody with these diseases, say schizophrenia, will try one drug. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, they'll go to a second drug and then a third drug. But clearly, there's a need because people are not everybody is well treated by the existing drugs, which are now generic. And so one of the things that we did at PureTech, and which we spun out a company called Karuna on, was a new way to treat schizophrenia, where there was a muscarinic type mechanism that had been developed by Eli Lilly, but had been abandoned because of side effects. It was a whole new treatment for schizophrenia, and it seemed to work, but the side effects were too great. And so what the scientists at PureTech did was they decided to combine this Lilly drug with a peripheral antimuscarinic with the thought that it would preserve the CNS effects of the original mechanism, but dampen down the side effects of what this new mechanism had. And it worked. And now that drug is about to be approved. It's called CAR-TX, and it's about to be approved by the FDA, we believe. And it's a tremendous addition to the armamentarium of a psychiatrist to use in people with schizophrenia. So it'd be envisioned that this drug would be used. You take the current generic drugs, but if they don't work, you can now have an alternative to go to, which hopefully will be able to treat the disease satisfactorily. I guess for your audience, it may resonate that. So PureTech came up with this. We formed a spin-out company called Karuna. Karuna went public, and Karuna has recently been purchased by Bristol Myers Squibb for $12 billion. It's with a B, $12 billion. So it shows you the interest that people have in potential new drugs for an area that some years ago was thought not to be very viable. And now there's a number of other small biotech companies that have sprung up with various treatments for neuroscience diseases, including another one from PureTech called Seaport Therapeutics, which your old friend Daphne Zohar is now the CEO. And they're looking to have some very interesting technologies that is being pushed toward neuroscience diseases. So it's a whole new renaissance in this area, which I think is very exciting for the future for people who unfortunately suffer from these diseases.
Yes. Do you think that it's pretty much a rebirth of neuroscience in different areas? I mean, I don't know if in Alzheimer, but in the rest of neuroscience, in the rest of the diseases and niches?
There seems to be a need. But the more important thing is, from a commercial standpoint, it looks like you can get a return on your investment. So it doesn't do a company any good if they come up with something new, and we talked about this earlier, if nobody's going to pay for it. But these drugs will have value because they will work in patients where nothing else works. And at that stage, then a new drug, particularly in psychosis or schizophrenia, can save the healthcare system a lot of money, because people who need to be hospitalized for that disease and treated, it's a very expensive treatment to deal with, particularly in inpatient. situation. So if you can treat them with pills on an outpatient setting, you can save the healthcare system an awful lot of money. But more importantly, you benefit patients and you return these people to a normal life. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I have been noticing across different persons from the industry is the risk of tech companies overcoming or taking over biotech. What can you say about this topic in particular? I mean, especially considering some statements or quotes from the CEO of NVIDIA, Elon Musk, releasing new drugs and equipment or medical equipment for neuroscience with that, Neuralink. What can you say us? What can you tell us about this topic?
I think what you're asking me is the inherent risk in investing in biotech, which is enormous, and it's not just in biotech; it's in big pharma as well. There's some companies some companies are doing very, very well. Certainly Lilly and Novo Nordisk with the GLP-1s are doing terrifically well financially, but other companies like Pfizer have had to go through some pretty severe cutbacks. Pfizer in this past year announced and have achieved $4 billion in cuts in their budget to cope with the decline in revenues. Pfizer made a lot of money during the pandemic, thanks to the vaccines and Paxlovid, but that was short-lived. And while they still have reasonable sales of vaccines, it's a lot less. And so Pfizer's had to cut back, and that's included in not just sales folks, but R&D folks as well. Now, having said that, any biotech is a risky investment. People come up with a great idea, but it's just an idea at the beginning, and they will form a small company around that idea, and they'll try and raise money, be it 30, 40, 50, maybe even $100 million to try and take that idea and get that to a drug that potentially works in patients. That amount of time, that amount of money will buy you anywhere from 18 months to maybe 2 or 3 years of life. So you have that length of time to get a drug, manufacture it, show that it's safe, run clinical trials, at least the early stage clinical trials to show that the drug might work. I say 9 out of 10 of those biotech companies fail. And so it might be maybe 8 out of 10 fail, but certainly there's a high degree of risk and a high degree of failure. That's always been the nature of this business, and that has not gotten easier. There's been a lot of promise about AI and how that's going to simplify things and give you a better chance of success.
A lot of investment recently on AI. There has been a lot of investment.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of promise for that, but right now it's just promise. And again, these companies are in AI are designed to show that by applying technology, you could overcome some of the hurdles in drug discovery. I think that remains to be seen. Old guys like me are skeptical because at the end of the day, what you have to do is test your drug in people. And everybody's different. Everybody thinks, well, you come up with a pill, it should work the same in everybody. But the fact of the matter is, if you just look at foods, there are people who are lactose intolerant. There are people who can die if they're exposed to peanuts, whereas 95% of people have no problem with peanuts. So that's just with food stuff. Now imagine what happens when you introduce a synthetic molecule or antibody or a biologic to patients. The thought that that's going to be the same universally in people is sort of naive. And furthermore, yes, you test these things in animal models and stuff like that, but animals are a little bit different from us. And so you still have the hurdles of safety and efficacy, and that will go no matter how much AI. You're not going to be able to predict safety in people with AI. You might be able to determine a better molecule to synthesize. You might be able to sort through some potential targets, But at the end of the day, you've still got to get the molecule, show it's safe, and get it to people, and show safety and efficacy, at least on balance. And that is very challenging. And I don't see that ever changing.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you in terms of skepticism and just, in fact, whenever I hear this news about AI or investments of AI in biotech, it reminds me to that period of time in which we had lots of companies developing drug development platforms where they could run, I don't know, 700 options of new drugs or of potential new drugs. And when it comes to show the efficacy of these potential drugs, it was minimal. I mean, the drugs that were able to be successful, it was minimal. So I fully agree with you in terms of.
Now, that's not to throw a wet blanket over the whole field, but rather it's just early days. I don't think it's a cure-all just yet. Maybe someday it will be. That I'd applaud that. Anything to make the drug discovery development process easier is well worth it. We're just not there yet in my mind.
Yes, absolutely. One last topic, and I promise I will let you go after this one. There's been a lot of controversial issues with related to IRA, what it's pretty much the controls. I don't know. Feel free to say your thoughts, or I don't know. Do you think that the biotech industry is like, I don't know, suffering from these new regulations, or it will suffer at this?
So the IRA is the first step into the government in the United States setting price controls. Now, it's pretty hard to argue with the Congress that they shouldn't have done this, because 85% of Americans in surveys said it was important to get drug prices under control. That's because of a lot of misinformation out there, that consumers think that that the government actually discovers drugs and all companies do is manufacture them and then charge an outrageous amount of money for them, which isn't true. Fact of the matter is, recent data has shown that roughly 95% of all drugs that are on the market have had ironically, little input into their discovery and development from government grants. But of course, that's not what skeptics of the industry advertise or publicize. So that's unfortunate. So that's the first problem with the IRA. So, but nevertheless, it's a reality. And so now, when a drug's been on the market in the United States, it's been on the market for 9 years. The government, when it purchases these drugs from Medicare and Medicaid, will effectively set the price. They say they'll negotiate, but the negotiation is, here's your price. If you don't deal with it, it's not going to be allowed to be on Medicare and Medicaid. So it's basically price. Now, the crazy part about this is that, so two things. Number one, the critics have said, well, the drug companies say this is going to impact R&D, the amount of drugs being discovered, but they're not telling the truth with that. Well, think about this. And the government also will say that this will amount in the savings of billions of dollars for Medicare and Medicaid. Well, if Medicare and Medicaid save billions, and I'm talking about, say, 60, 70, $100 billion over the next 10 years on the drug bill, that's fine, and it accomplishes what Americans wanted. However, that's less money for the biopharmaceutical company to make. And the biopharmaceutical company invests 25% of all its sales into R&D. So for somebody to say, well, if you set these price controls, there won't be an impact in R&D, is naive at best and stupid, to be honest. So let's just use the number $100 billion. If you save $100 billion in spending over the next 10 or 12 years, that means there's $25 billion less for R&D. Well, so that means that's a whole lot less of research, $25 billion worth of R&D. That's the amount of money invested by like 3 of the top companies right now. So you eliminate that amount of R&D, so you can have less money for R&D, and of course you're going to have fewer drugs coming out. So that's the first thing that the IRA will do that most people don't appreciate. The second thing that's sort of stupid is, so for some reason, Congress decided that they'd be negotiating for small molecule drugs, the drugs that are pills, after 9 years of being on the market. But for the injectable drugs, the biologics, the antibodies, and things like that, they won't start negotiating until after 13 years. Well, already that's having an impact on the research being done by companies, because basically companies are saying, well, if I'm only going to get 9 years without price controls on a small molecule drug, but I can get 13 years with a large molecule, I'm going to be doing more large molecule research and do that. It really, from a discovery standpoint, it doesn't impact you anymore for a biologic or an antibody than it does making a small molecule or a pill. But it's a whole lot less convenient for patients. Furthermore, it's large molecule injectable drugs have to be administered normally in clinics or hospitals or doctors' offices, which jacks up the amount of cost and really ruins impacts a person's lifestyle. Instead of just going to a drugstore, getting your vial of pills and taking them home, you've got to once a week, twice a month, whatever, make an appointment, go to a clinic, get your injection, etc. And so it raises the cost, overall healthcare costs for the healthcare system, when we should be doing more in the small molecules instead of pushing things the other way. So there are a variety of issues with the Inflation Reduction Act that are unfortunate, but it is law right now. And by the way, initially it was for like 15 drugs a year. I think eventually it will be for all the drugs that are marketed. So that won't.
That would be super negative for the industry.
Government does not. They usually start small, but expand things very rapidly.
Yes. There was someone from Biotech saying that, okay, maybe the industry failed to tell the patients or the overall population the value of the drugs, but even there was one that even quoted like, okay, we need better marketing. But I don't think it's actually quite an answer, at least in this case. Maybe it's like to better portray what the advancements and the progress made from the biotech industry was for over years.
Maggie, I got to tell you, after the pandemic, after the vaccines, after the antibodies that came out, after the therapeutic antiviral drugs, the reputation of the industry, as gets measured by various polls in the United States, the Gallup poll, for example, and others, showed the reputation of the industry got to its highest as it's been in 30 years. And I thought, finally people get this, because who else was going to come up with vaccines other than the private industry? Who else was going to invest the money? Pfizer had to invest $2 billion up front into mRNA vaccines, and when it was an unproven technology. That was just one thing that nobody knew.
We're keeping our fingers crossed back in those days.
Yeah. So I thought for sure now people will finally get it. That lasted about less than a year. And then, the industry got attacked and we're still spending too much on drugs. There are certain Congress senators and Congress persons in the United States who this is their main bugaboo, and so it's dropped down again. So we'll see. I'm hoping that now that the government is negotiating with prices, that this will go away as an issue, and while the industry will have to suffer through it, nevertheless, maybe people can, as you said, focus on the good the industry does, the valued products that they come up. Let me bore you with one other example. So if 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would have said to you, the industry is going to come up with a drug that helps diabetics, that causes people to lose 50 or 20% of their weight, which also could be used for addiction, which will prevent heart attacks and strokes, by virtue of being able to lose this weight, and you can prove that study-wise, and also obesity is implicated in a number of cancers. If you come up with a drug that treats diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancer, maybe addiction, what would that be worth? And you would say priceless, because the impact of that drug across the whole spectrum of diseases and the healthcare system would be enormous. Well, so these drugs aren't cheap. They run about $1,000, $1,200 a month. I would argue that the value of that is terrific, right? For what these drugs do. And of course, there are people attacking it always. And again, Congress wants hearings as to how could they possibly charge this amount of money for these, which in my mind are wonder drugs. And yet, and what people always forget in this country, probably around the world, is that at some point, these drugs become generic and they become very cheap. And so a company has to make their investment when they can, make back their investment, and then plow that money more into research to continue to grow and to continue to develop these kind of miracle drugs. So, but people don't quite get that, and so that's the upward pressure we feel in this country around pricing.
No, it's just you remind me one case that happened here in Argentina. There was back in the days of COVID, the Russians were testing the Sputnik here in Argentina in a local lab, Richmond it's called, and it was found that the industry, I mean the biotech industry, move on. Here in Argentina, we have an mRNA plan for vaccines, mRNA vaccines, right? And it was fun because there was recent news on a plan for vaccines of such as the Sputnik, which now, I mean, it's from, when was COVID? 2020? Early 2020? Yeah, from early 2020 up to this day, that technology, the one from Sputnik, became like super old, because now we are talking about a broader deployment of mRNA vaccines in other diseases that are more effective, that are faster, that are even faster to develop and to give to patients. So it was fun to watch this company. Of course, I can't help being a black sheep, no, I have to say, but this company was like, hey, we have finished this plan for vaccines such as Sputnik and so on. And it was like, okay, it's great, but we already have mRNA technology all over the world. So, but that's pretty much the improvement that biotech has made, despite of everything, despite of the challenges throughout these past years.
Amazing story for the biopharmaceutical industry. Amazing story.
Yes, and a lot of things coming. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for neuroscience, in particular Alzheimer, but I'm going to leave that topic aside so far. But yeah, hopefully we can get some news on that area.
I'm very confident. I'm very confident you'll see some new approaches, and not like 10 or 20 years from now, 4 or 5 years probably, in all likelihood.
Yes, in that case, I agree as well. Well, thank you, John, for this time. Super happy to talk to you again. And well, I'm excited about what's new in PureTech and also Karuna. So very happy to see what's next.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bueno, esto ha sido todo en la entrevista con John. Espero que lo hayan disfrutado y próximamente tendremos más novedades del sector de video. Muchas gracias.